Right now I'm staring out over the border fence, and I can see probably about 2 miles ahead of me for the first time with this morning sunlight. And because it is clear and there hasn't been as many airstrikes, which picks up a lot of dust and sometimes obscures our view in the cameras, this is one of the first times I've actually looked with my naked eye into Beit Hanoun. And I'm staring at toppled over buildings right now, apartment blocks that look like the roof has slumped over and fallen on the floors below. And I just heard some patter of what sounded like machine gun fire. I'm sure you probably can't hear that because I have my AirPods in, but it continues. This is an area, Beit Hanoun is an area where they believe Hamas still has a stronghold.
About where you are, and I mean, whether you can see any of the operations within Gaza.
Oh, I certainly can. In fact, I often come here at night, so it's more difficult to see Beit Hanoun, which is this town north of Gaza City in the very northeast corner of the Gaza Strip. So right now I'm staring out over the border fence, and I can see probably about 2 miles ahead of me for the first time with this morning sunlight. And because it is clear and there hasn't been as many airstrikes, which picks up a lot of dust and sometimes obscures our view in the cameras, this is one of the first times I've actually looked with my naked eye into Beit Hanoun. And I'm staring at toppled over buildings right now, apartment blocks that look like the roof has slumped over and fallen on the floors below. And I just heard some patter of what sounded like machine gun fire. I'm sure you probably can't hear that because I have my AirPods in, but it continues. This is an area, Beit Hanoun is an area where they believe Hamas still has a stronghold.
It seems like we've just lost audio connection for a moment with Zach. Hopefully we will re-establish that because it's, once again, we are back in the situation where there are strikes in Gaza, this time targeting the south of the territory. I think Zach is back with us. Zach, we just lost you for a moment. Do continue.
I'm terribly sorry. I hope that you might have heard in the last 30 seconds or so just a patter of machine gun fire in this area. This is Beit Hanoun, a town that the IDF says they haven't been able to basically take control over because they say the tunnel network underneath is too expansive, even though it's behind their encirclement lines of Gaza City.
Are we getting a sense that the Israeli military is adopting a different strategy since the restarting of the war? There's been quite a stark change in tone, really, from the Americans. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that the huge loss of civilian life cannot be repeated in the south as we saw in the north.
That's a great question. I don't see a change in tone from the Israeli side or from the IDF. The rhetoric is still ratcheted up as high as it can go. This elimination of Hamas. There has been a curious change in the language since the hostage exchange, because we have heard Israeli leaders very specifically for the first 3 weeks, I would say, equate Hamas to ISIS. Every public statement they would give, they would say Hamas is ISIS, Hamas is worse than ISIS. And since the hostage exchange, they've been noticeably, they haven't used that coin of phrase as much. I should say I haven't heard any of the public officials that will give these daily briefings end their press conferences like they used to with that line. So that's really the only noticeable change. Otherwise, the rhetoric is still the same as it was before this, which is we plan to eliminate Hamas at any cost, and that they plan to turn their attention now to the south and that second largest city in Gaza, which is Khan Yunis.
And clearly there are still many hostages being held by Hamas, and it's difficult to establish how many of those are, alive, able to be released and come up with some kind of a deal. Is there a sense there is an appetite within the Israeli government and the Israeli population at large for another pause in fighting to try and ensure that more hostages are brought home?
I think there certainly is. They have discussed what the cost would be. Some of the figures, of course, we're not privy to these negotiations, so we don't know exactly what would be possible. But some of the figures have been thrown out by Hamas is all Palestinian prisoners in exchange for all the Israeli hostages. And you get the sense that, at least within the Israeli public, that's a cost that's too high, that they aren't willing to exchange against those terms. This has entered into an unfortunate stage for the Romanian hostages because most of them are men. And the clear line that has been spoken to by the Israelis is that they believe that Hamas is going to ask for a much higher price for these men. And they consider many of them to be soldiers, fighters, prisoners of war, at least in the language they use.
Zach, really good to speak to you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is our reporter, Zach Anders, who is in Sderot. It's an Israeli town just to the northeast of Gaza, and he's looking over into Gaza as those strikes continue.